Thank you, councillors. Could I have your attention now? I'd like to declare the November ordinary meeting of council opened at 4:36. I'd like to welcome all of the councillors and executive team and also those who may be listening online. I'd now like to begin by acknowledging the Kamilaroi people as the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today. And also I'd like to pay my respects to elders, both past and present, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal community members who may be present or listening online. If I can now please ask that you all be upstanding for prayer. Eternal God, our loving Father, we come to thee this day in the name of Jesus Christ, who is the lover of our souls and the saviour of all mankind. May we feel his love and respond to it. May his spirit shine in lives that are worried, lives that are darkened by worry, doubt or fear. Strengthen and guide those who are trying to do what is right. Make it plain to them. Make us more mindful of the needs of our fellow man and less absorbed in selfish concerns, that Christ may approve and bless what we do here this day. We ask these blessings in his name. Amen. Please be seated. Councillors, I'll now read out the bereavements of those that we've lost in our community between the 20th of October this year and the 16th of November. And as a community, we mourn the loss of Kevin Kelvin Picton, Peter Gordon McElveen, Jan Lee Guest, Doreen Ivy Bartlett, and Leslie Smiles. If I could please ask councillors if you all and executive team all upstanding for 1 minute silence as we pass our respect on to the deceased and we extend our condolences to the family of those deceased. Please be seated. We'll now move on to those that may have apologies for today's meeting. In the chamber, we have all elected members except for Councillor O'Keefe and Councillor Hoddle, who are joining us virtually for our meeting. So we have 100% participation by elected members, and we also have 100% participation by executive team. So no leave of absence request or required. So we'll now move on to confirmation of minutes of previous meeting that was held on the 19th of October. And I'd like to call on an elected member to move that they be a true and accurate record of the meeting, please. Moved by Councillor Hook and seconded by Councillor Moses. Before I put this motion, are there any questions or comments?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Councillor Hoddle.
Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to draw to the council's attention in the minutes the last item, which is to do with the good old code of conduct matter regarding myself. So it's made it quite clear now by council accepting that censure that from here on I would not be able to vote on any matter regarding the showground. Now, I just thought this is something I just wanted to ask council if they think this is a good policy, because if you look at the showground council working committee, there are 3 councillors on it, myself, Councillor Hook and Councillor Fuller. Well, you could say that the 3 of us do have interests in the showground. Councillor Hook has his wife is a volunteer with the RDA. Councillor Fuller, her brother, is a member of the Trotting Association. And myself, my wife is a volunteer with the Namoi Horse Association. My daughter is a volunteer.
Councillor Hoddle, if I could just interrupt for a moment. This
Yeah.
motion is simply one to accept that the records be true and correct in relation to what was voted.
Yeah.
If
I
you have a concern with a resolution, then I'd suggest that be another pathway, because in this actual item, all we are resolving is if there are true and accurate record of the meeting.
Okay, well, in that case, I'd have to say that they're not, because there's matters in that are not correct, or there's omissions in them. However, there's only one vote.
Okay, thank you. Then, councillors, are there any further questions or comments before I put the motion? There be no questions. Put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declare the motion carried. Item 6 is a statement of ethical obligation, and in accordance with section 233A of the Local Government Act 1993, councillors are reminded that their oath or affirmation of office and their obligations under council's code of conduct to disclose and appropriately manage conflicts of interest. We'll move on next. Item 7 is declaration of interest, and I'll now call on any elected member, if you or executive team member, if you have a declaration that you'd now like to put forward. I'll call a second time for any further declarations in relation to the business paper. Third and final call, no declarations. We'll move on to community presentations, and we have no community presentations, so straight to my Merrill Minute in item 9.1. Councillors and executive team, I'd like to bring your attention to the Merrill Minute, and it is headed Declaration of Statewide Road Emergency. The motion that I put before you is that Gunnedah Shire Council joins the Local Government New South Wales and Country Mayors Association of New South Wales in declaring a statewide road emergency. Now, councillors, you all have a printed copy of this notice of motion in front of you, and also it's been in the report. So I won't read it word for word, and I'll take it that it has been read, and I'm sure if there are any questions, I'll open that up for the opportunity to ask questions shortly. But in brief, councillors, we know our community has really suffered the last 12 months with 9 now, as of today, with the peak flooding events in the community. Some of those certainly more devastating than others, but as a council, our infrastructure is under enormous pressure, and roads would certainly be at the highest level of what that pressure and therefore financial burden will be on us. Once we get back to normal weather patterns and the flooding water stops and the rain events stop, no doubt we'll be moving back towards another drought time or event. We don't know when that will be. But the task, while not fully assessed at the moment, we've heard from our Manager of Infrastructure Services, is massive. We're hearing from our community. It's a big problem right across the Shire to the north, south, east, west. So we anticipate there'll be many millions of dollars worth of damage. Also, the big issue and reason why I'm suggesting we support these peak organisations in calling for further assistance from state and Commonwealth governments is that the task will take a long period of time with the plant, equipment and people that we have. And that's not unique to us. That is something right across New South Wales I'm hearing from country mayors, is that in some a lot worse position than what we are. So we won't be able to rely on support from our neighbours because they've got the same pain. And we could go hundreds of kilometres and look for support and we won't find it because they're in the same pain. In fact, some mayors I speak to tell me of parts of their shire that have been isolated for nearly 2 years. So it is a major impact, and without further assistance from state and Commonwealth governments, meaningful assistance, not just funds, but also in that task of identifying how to swell our numbers of plant equipment and people, then the pain will be long lasting. So you'll know, and you would have seen at the end of my Merrill Minute, in supporting this, you will also be supporting me in writing to the Prime Minister, Mr. Albanese, and also the Premier of New South Wales, Mr. Perrottet, in seeking further support. So, councillors, I now put that Merrill Minute to you, and as being a Merrill Minute, I don't need a seconder. So I'd now like to open it up to any questions before I put the motion. No questions?
Mr. Mayor, as there are no questions, I'd just like to applaud the Country Mayors Association and also yourself with this Merrill Minute and following up what I believe is the most important issue. And without a very, very strong cry to our state and federal governments, this issue will not be resolved. And I just hope that there is the strength in this plead and call to our state and federal parliaments to take heed of this particular motion and to bring the necessary funding so that we can get this nation back where it should be.
Thank you, Councillor Hull. Any further questions or comments, councillors? Be the case, then I'll put Councillor Fuller.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I think we've got Mrs. Turley coming next week from local government, and I think we need to draw her, which I know you will, draw her attention to. It's 126 local government areas that are going to suffer the same. So thank you for that, and thank you for all you're doing for that.
Thank you. Councillor Hoddle, do you have your hand up? Would you like to speak?
No, sorry, no, I don't.
All right, councillors, if there are no further questions or comments, I'll put this motion. All in favour? Against? I'll call that unanimously supported, and thank you. We'll move on to our next item, which is General Manager's reports, or one report, and I'll hand over to Mr. Groth to detail the recommendation that relates to New South Wales Rural Doctors Network final report.
Good evening, councillors and public. As detailed in front of you, the report recommends the receiving and noting of the New South Wales Rural Doctors Network report in their engagement to address shortages of GPs in Gundarr Shire, and also to endorse recommendations as outlined in section 11 of the report. I note that as run through by Dr. Lowe in our workshop this afternoon, there have been some changes that she has suggested to that report that was included in the business paper and separately emailed to councillors this afternoon. Those changes don't affect the endorsement of recommendations in section 11 of the report. However, they do relate to the adoption of the report as noted in section 1 of the recommendation. Pleased to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Groth. Before we call for a mover of the motion, before we call for questions, I'll ask for a mover of the motion, please. Thank you, Councillor Fuller, seconded by Councillor Moses. Councillor Fuller, as the mover of the motion, would you like to ask a question or speak
No,
in
Mr.
favour?
Mayor, I think we've gone through it this afternoon in great detail. Thank you.
Do I have an elected member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question? Councillor Moses, as the seconder of the motion, do you wish to speak to it?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillors, before I put this motion to a vote, I'd just like to congratulate all of you and the executive team in the way that we've worked with the Rural Doctors Network and the collaboration of 5 in the medical services area over the last 2 years. It's 2 years this month since we as an organisation resolved against Royal Merrill Minute to seek support from Rural Doctors Network in this very dire issue that we had, and we're still experiencing, not as bad, but certainly experiencing in some way in the community. We now have a final report with recommendations and an action plan and a pathway, I believe, to continue to work towards encouraging more doctors to come to our community. So a huge thank you to Rural Doctors Network at no cost to this community, committing all of those hours, all of that effort over the 2-year period, and also to you for the time and effort you put in. Thank you. So in saying that, I'd now like to put the motion. All in favour? Against? I'll call that unanimously supported also. Thank you, Mr. Groth, for your contribution. Now moving on to Director of Corporate and Community Services reports, and I'll call on Ms. Stidworthy to detail her recommendations, starting with 1, preparation of audited financial statements and audited reports for the year ending 30 of June 2022. Thank you, Ms. Stidworthy.
Thank you, and through you, Mr Mayor. The purpose of the report is to present Council's audited financial statements for the year ended 30 June 2022 in accordance with section 419 of the Local Government Act. Members of the public can make submissions on the audited financial statements and the auditor's reports contained therein within 7 days after the date on which the reports are being presented to the public, which is today. If any submissions are received, we will report these back to Council as a further report at the next council meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Edworthy. I now call for elected member to move the motion. Move the recommendation become a motion. Thank you, Councillor MacArthur, and seconded by Councillor Luke. Councillor MacArthur is the mover. Do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Have elected member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question? Councillor Luke is the seconder of the motion. Do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's, I think, quite apparent to all of us the amount of hard and diligent work that has gone into creating these audited financial statements and the reports. And I think not just the work that's gone into produce the reports, but the what the reporting reveals, which is a testament to all the good work of all of our staff. So I'd just like to congratulate all concerned.
Thank you, Councillor Luke. There are no further questions or comments, councillors. I'll now like to put this motion. All in favour? Against? We're on a roll. Unanimous. Now move on to item 11.2, 2021-22 annual report, and I'll hand back to Mr. Edworthy.
Thank you, and through you, Mr Mayor. The purpose of this report is to present the annual report to Council for the 21-22 financial year. The annual report must be submitted to the Minister for Local Government by the 30th of November this month. The annual report contains an overview of what Gunnedah Shire Council has achieved in the 21-22 financial year. And as you'll recall, it was an environment where Council was still trying to manage many of the impacts created by COVID-19. We also received a large value of external grant funding and had to manage a significant volume and value of projects, in addition to providing normal services to the community. There is a wide range of information reported on in the annual report that would be of interest to the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edworthy. Now call for elected member to move the motion to become, or the recommendation to become a motion, I should say. Thank you, Councillor Hook, and seconded by Councillor Moses. Councillor Hook has moved the motion. Do you wish to speak to it?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Do I have an elected member who'd like to ask a question or speak against the motion? Councillor Moses is seconded. Do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Well, being no questions or no one to speak against it, I'm going to put the motion. All in favour? Again, unanimously supported. Moving on to item 11.3, fees and charges, reduction or waiver of fees associated with natural disaster. And I'll hand back to Mr. Edworthy to detail that recommendation.
Thank you, and through you, Mr Mayor. The purpose of the report is to update Council on actions taken following the October and November 2022 floods in relation to the disposal of flood waste material, and to propose a new category for fee and charge waivers following natural disaster events. This is proposed to allow waivers of fees and charges to be more easily considered under delegated authority in future, as opposed to needing to present matters back to Council for a decision in those situations. The proposal is required to be publicly exhibited for 28 days, and that is the report recommendation, is to create that new category for potential waivers of fees and charges following natural disaster events.
Thank you, Mr. Edworthy. I now call for, thank you, Councillor Hook has moved the motion and seconded by Councillor Luke. Councillor Hook was a mover. Do you wish to speak to it?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think this is a very sensible recommendation and one that actually supports those people who have been badly affected by flooding. It might not be a huge contribution, but it certainly helps with people that are under stress.
Thank you, Councillor Hook. Do I have an elected member who'd like to ask a question or speak against it? Councillor MacArthur.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and through you, just a question to the Director of Corporate Services. Is it our intention, noting that we do forego quite a large amount of fees, and I note that it was 1.87 million that was foregone, and I'm not questioning the basis for which that is done, because it's obvious it's needed, but do we then turn around and seek funding from the state government to recoup that lost income?
So the short answer to that is yes, where there is the ability to claim those costs as eligible costs under any available disaster restoration funding arrangements, we will. So our understanding is that the cost of the waste skip bins will be reimbursed to council. And we'll need to go through a process to see whether any of the fee waivers granted at the landfill gate would also be eligible under those funding arrangements as well. But we will do that. And we had a similar scenario with the November 2021 floods where most costs were reimbursable.
Councillor Luke is the second to the motion. Would you like to speak?
May I just clarify through you, Mr Mayor, to the director? So it's not 1.8 million, it's $1,800, 874. So that is, yeah, out by a factor of, yeah. Is that right? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Yes, correct. So I'm just finding the exact reference in the report, but it's around about that figure. It was a nominal amount. We didn't obviously have a large population affected. So the amounts of material disposed of at that point in time were minimal. Obviously, it'll be a little bit more now because some time has passed since the report was drafted.
I think the importance too also is the clarification that those funds, whatever those funds are, that if there's an opportunity through natural disaster declaration, can be claimed.
I understand that. I just didn't want anybody to think that it was costing $1.8 million. Thank you.
No, I thank Councillor Luke for that too. Perhaps I've been looking at too many financial statements this afternoon.
Councillor Luke, did you want to speak in favour as a seconder to the motion?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
I'll now call.
Mr Mayor, could I ask a question?
You may.
I just want some clarification on that. We've been told it was 1.187, and is it in fact 187,000, the cost of this road waiver charges? Could you confirm that, please?
Thank you, and through you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Huddle, for the question. So just in the report under the financial implications section, it's just noted there that the total income foregone by the fee reduction at $111 per tonne which was basically a waiver of fees for waste presented at the landfill gate at that point in time, was $1,874.36. There were some costs at that time that weren't able to be quantified because we were still had to collect some of the waste from the skip bins. We haven't calculated those figures yet. So we probably are looking at something in the order of $4,000 or $5,000 probably by the time we take those costs into account. But within the report, it's 1874.36.
Thank you, Mr Idworthy. Any further questions, councillors, before I put the motion? Being none, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Unanimously supported. We'll now move on to item 11.4, which is policy hardship. Thank you, Mr Idworthy.
Thank you, and through you, Mr Mayor. The purpose of the report is to provide council with an update to the hardship policy, which is due for review. The hardship policy provides measures to assist ratepayers experiencing hardship. The marked up copy of the policy is included in the business paper. You'll note we aren't proposing any significant changes, and we'll be maintaining the level of assistance that's currently provided to the community in relation to any financial hardship or other types of hardship experience with the payment of rates and charges.
Thank you, Mr Idworthy. I now call for elected member to move the motion, the recommendation become a motion. Thank you, Councillor Fuller, and seconded by Councillor Luke. Councillor Fuller, as the mover of the motion, used to speak to it.
Only to say that it's great policy. It's been in for a long time, and there are some people who've had to use that policy, and it's a very good policy that we've had for a long while. So thank you to staff and every.
Now call on the elected member who'd like to ask a question or speak against this motion. Councillor Luke, as the second of the motion, used to speak to it.
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
No questions or comments, then I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Unanimously supported. There's a theme here today. Move on, item 11.5, and that is quarterly budget review as at the 30th of September 2022, and I'll hand back to Mr Idworthy to detail that recommendation.
Thank you, and through you, Mr Mayor. The purpose of the report is to provide council with a quarterly budget review for the period ending 30 September 2022 and to recommend the proposed budget amendments to council. The overall results from the quarterly budget review are a negative impact on the consolidated operating result. The quarterly budget review proposes a negative adjustment of almost $74,000 on the operating result, increasing that to around $728,000 deficit. While every effort was made to contain the budget adjustments without any overall negative impact on the operating result, there were some unanticipated impacts reflected in the budget review. One of the predominant ones was a reduction in revenue from water usage charges that we did need to recognise to reflect what the current full year forecast would be in that particular area. Otherwise, there's some reasonably positive results within the review apart from that. And the staff have worked very hard to try and make sure that their expenditure is contained within the approved budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Didworthy. Now call on an elected member to move the recommendation to become a motion. Thank you, councillor McGrath, and seconded by councillor Moses. Councillor McGrath, as a mover of the motion, do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I now call for elected member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question. Councillor Moses, as a second to the motion, do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Be the case, then I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Unanimously supported. Moving on, item 11.6, first quarter budget progress report, and I'll hand back to Ms Didworthy.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of the report is to provide council with an update on the first quarter project progress for the 22-23 financial year. The report also contains a summary of the variations to projects that have occurred since the last update was provided to council on the quarterly project progress report.
Thank you, Ms Didworthy. I now call for elected member to move the recommendation to become a motion. Thank you, councillor Luke, seconded by councillor MacArthur. Councillor Luke, as a mover of the motion, do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I now call for elected member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question.
I have a question, Mr. Mayor, through you to the
Thank-
Director of Infrastructure
Thank you, councillor MacArthur.
Services or Ms. Didworthy. Just on the bridges, so I'm on page 48 of the paper version of the council paper tonight. We've got a project finish date updated to the 10th, 2022, except we're now in November. So I just wondered if that perhaps needed to be revised.
Thank you, councillor MacArthur, for the question, and through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, that's correct. The project completion date will need to be revised for that project. I think you'll find that the part of the reason for the discrepancy between where we're actually at right now and where it was at the time is that that's the first quarter project progress report. So at the time that the information was populated, it would have been correct.
I now call for any further questions or councillor who'd like to speak against the motion. Okay, well then I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Unanimously supported. Moving on to item 11.7, investments, and I'll hand back to Ms Didworthy.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. The report is presented in accordance with clause 212 of the Local Government General Regulation 2021. Provides details on the cash and investments held by council as at the 31st of October 2022. The report notes that $90.4 million was held as at 31 October and that all investments were held in accordance with council's investment policy limits.
Thank you, Ms Didworthy. I'll call for elected member to move the recommendation to become a motion. Thank you, councillor Hook, seconded by councillor Fuller. Councillor Hook, as the mover of the motion, do you wish to speak to it?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know it's in good hands.
Now call for elected member who'd like to ask a question or speak against this motion. Councillor Fuller, as a second of the motion, wish to speak to it?
No, thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Be the case, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declare the motion carried unanimously. Moving on to the last item for Ms Didworthy at 11.8, outstanding resolution register, and I'll hand back to Ms Didworthy to detail it.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. The report provides details on council's outstanding resolutions and actions taken to complete them. There were 35 outstanding council resolutions detailed in the attachment to the report at the time the report was drafted.
Thank you, Ms Didworthy. I now call for elected member to move the recommendation. Thank you, councillor Moses, seconded by councillor Fuller. Councillor Moses, as the mover of the motion, do you wish to speak to it?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
I'll now call for elected member who may like to ask a question or speak against the motion. Councillor Fuller is the second to the motion.
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Well, if there's no debate, no questions, councillors, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Unanimously supported. Thank you, Ms Didworthy, for your contribution to our November meeting. Moving on. Item 12, Director of Planning and Environmental Services reports. And I'll call on Mr Johns to detail his first of two items for November, starting with 12.1, application to modify development consent number 234396.009. Thank you, Mr Johns.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and through you, councillors. As you would have read in your report, this application relates to a modification to staging for the Mornington Estate development. The reason it's before you is that council determined the original application, so therefore you must make a determination on this, and council staff recommendation is that the modification be approved subject to conditions as enclosed in the report.
Thank you, Mr Johns. I now call. Thank you. Councillor Hook has moved the recommendation to become a motion, and seconded by Councillor MacArthur. Councillor Hook as the mover. Do you wish to speak to it?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
I now call for elected member who may like to ask a question or speak against the motion. Councillor MacArthur is the second to the motion. Do you wish to speak?
Only to say we need some more housing, so great to see another development come on board.
Are there any further questions or comments, councillors, before I put this motion? Being none, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? I'll call that unanimously supported. Moving on, Mr Johns, to your next item, which is item 12.2, Murray-Darling Association Delegates Report for September 2022.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and through you, councillors. This report is essentially the Mayor's delegates report for the Murray-Darling Association meeting in September. You might think that the Mayor has been tardy in putting this report only to the November meeting, but in actual fact, it was with me and I neglected to put it at the last council meeting, so that's on me. But that information is there for the benefit of councillors.
Thank you, Mr Johns. Councillors, I'll just direct you to the final paragraph in my report. And whilst I won't seek this to be part of a resolution today, I certainly wanted to highlight the fact that these, now that I've been to several of these conferences for the Murray-Darling Association, I find them to be extremely informative and well received by delegates that come right across the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. So there are hundreds and hundreds of people that turn up to these to hear from politicians to senior bureaucrats and people who are in the industry of water. So what I've actually said in that last paragraph is I think we should combine with Tamworth Regional Council to put forward a bid to hold the conference for 2023-24 conjointly with Tamworth and Gunnedah. Obviously more detail would need to be designed, but I think there hasn't been a conference in this part for a very, very long time. And I think with what we're seeing in natural disasters and dam capacities and so forth, there's much to talk about in the Northern Basin. So I'll just put that out for your consideration and something that may come to a council meeting in future time for further support. So in saying that, I'll move that motion as the author of the delegates report. I'll call for a seconder now, please. Thank you, Councillor Fuller, and happy to answer any questions. Councillor.
Just curious if you've had discussion with your Tamworth counterpart about potentially hosting in the future and what their thoughts are.
The Tamworth took a small delegation to this conference. They weren't a member of Region 11 of the Murray-Darling Association. They came home and joined, and we discussed it at the conference about the potential concept. And they were very, they were in agreement that it would be a good thing, a good benefit for the northern area if we were to consider doing it in the future. Obviously, there would be a lot to putting a bid together. There will be some expense and a lot of consideration as to about how it would run and how we would do it together, but there was some genuine interest at the time. You may.
I was just curious about the benefit of doing that collaboratively rather than us going it alone.
The simple reason is we wouldn't have the ability to accommodate the amount of people. It's a big conference. we wouldn't have, I doubt we'd fit them all in the town hall. We may, but with all of the trade stands and everything else that goes on with these conferences, it'd be tight for us to do it, to hold it ourselves. Any further questions or comments, councillors? Councillor Fuller?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, those,
Councillor Fuller first, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Hoddle. Thank you, Councillor Fuller.
Mr. Mayor, how many people are we talking for this conference?
Look, I can't recall. They're around 300, I think, delegates, but then you have a lot of the trade stands and all of those people that go along with the trade stands. So,
Okay, still think we could do it.
well, it's something to consider for the future. We certainly know that. I think bids won't actually. It's probably another 10 months before bids even open for that conference. So, certainly something we can consider and discuss. Councillor Hoddle.
thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was accompanied the mayor to the Murray-Darling Association conference, and I went with a fairly open mind about how useful it was going to be. And I must say, it's something we must remain a member of because of what's happening with water and how important water is in our shire. Federal Labor went to the last election and has promised to return another 450 gigalitres of water to the environment. And some of that will probably come from this northern end. And unless we're part of this process of being informed and being involved, then we could suffer very badly from water being removed from our irrigation potential here. So I'd have to just back up what the mayor said, that it is a very worthwhile thing for us to be members of. Irrigation, water and water for our town is very important, and I commend the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hoddle. Any further questions or comments, councillors, before I put the motion? Being done, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Unanimously supported. Thank you, Mr. Johns. We'll now move on to Director of Infrastructure Services reports, and I'll call on Mr. Bartlett to detail his recommendation, starting at item 13.1, reallocation of funds, grave shoring system. Thank you, Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, the purpose of this report is to seek council's approval to transfer unspent operational funding to capital works to a maximum of $12,000 to support the purchase of a grave shoring system to meet workplace health and safety requirements and best practice.
Thank you, Mr. Bartlett. I'll now call on an elected member to move. Thank you, Councillor MacArthur, and seconded by Councillor Moses. Councillor MacArthur is the mover of the motion. Do you wish to speak to it?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Now call for elected member who may like to ask a question or speak against this motion. Councillor Moses as the seconder to the motion. Do you wish to speak to it?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Well, if there's no further debate, then councillors, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Call that unanimously supported as well. Moving on, item 13.2, Showground Working Group meeting minutes for September 2022, and I'll hand back to Mr. Bartlett to detail.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, the purpose of this report is for information sharing and acknowledgement of the Showground Working Group meeting minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Bartlett. I'll now call for elected member to move the recommendation to become the motion. Thank you, Councillor Hook, and seconded by. I'm swinging around. Councillor Fuller. Councillor Hook as a mover of the motion and also chair of this working group. Would you like to speak to it?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I just want to point out item 12, a purchase tech paddock, and it says in the item that Councillor Hook, council will make it a priority to investigate regarding the possibility of purchasing the tech paddock. I don't think that that was actually the intent. The intent was that we asked council to investigate the possibility of acquiring the tech paddock. The reason for that is that any future expansion in that area that doesn't include the tech paddock leaves the whole showground precinct exposed to not being able to expand anywhere in the future. There's no other area of possibility, so the whole committee thought it was a priority to see if there was a possibility of acquiring that tech paddock. The other thing is that coming up shortly will be a review of the master plan, and that master plan it's going to be very, very difficult to review that master plan without knowing whether the tech paddock is or isn't included as part of the showground precinct.
Thank you, councillor Hook. I now call for an elected member who'd like to speak against the motion, not the comments from councillor Hook, but the motion before you. No?
Could I ask a question?
You may.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, I'm normally on that committee, but I was at the Murray-Darling Association and was absent. But with the master plan, when do you think that process will start and how long will it run for?
Thank you for the question, councillor Hoddle, and through you, Mr. Mayor. The council has set aside budget to undertake the master planning process this financial year. At this stage, we're waiting on the plans of management confirmation to be approved by Department of Crown Lands before we proceed commencing that process. It's one of those, it's something that we need to have done first.
Councillor Fuller, as a second to the motion, do you wish to speak to it?
I need to comment on your words about the tech paddock, and you're correct in what you say about that tech paddock. It was put forward to support it, but not in the term. Okay, thank you.
Are there any further questions or comments, councillors? Councillors, I'm about to put the motion, and the motion is that the minutes of the Showground Working Group meeting held on the 19th of September 2022 be received and noted. In saying that, I'll now move that motion. All in favour? Against? I'll call that unanimously supported. Moving right along. Thank you, Mr. Bartlett, for your contribution. Item 14 is report to committees. And the first one is the Audit Committee meeting held on the 20th of October 2022. So I'll now call for a mover of that recommendation. Thank you, councillor MacArthur, as the sole elected member who is on the Audit Committee. And I'll now call for a seconder to that motion. Thank you, councillor Moses. Councillor MacArthur, as the mover, do you wish to speak to it?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I now call for elected member who may like to ask a question or speak against this motion. Councillor Moses, as the seconder to the motion, do you wish to speak to it?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Be the case, I put the motion. All in favour? Against? Unanimously supported. Item 14.2, the Planning, Environment and Development Committee meeting held on the 2nd of November. I'll now like to call on an elected member to move the motion, which reads that council notes all items of the Planning, Environment and Development Committee meeting held on the 2nd of November 2022 were dealt with by the committee within its delegated powers. Thank you, councillor Hook has moved it. Councillor MacArthur has seconded. Councillor Hook has moved that motion. Do you wish to speak to it?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I now call for elected member who may like to ask a question or speak against the motion. Councillor MacArthur is a seconder of the motion. Do you wish to speak to it?
Only to say that it's good to have this matter resolved. It's been with planning for some time, and the developer proponent has compromised a little on the development, and hopefully we'll see that space filled in a stylish way.
Are there any further questions or comments, councillors, before I put this motion? Being none, then I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? The motion carried. Moving right along to item number 15, which is the delegates report, and 15.1 is for 2022 Australian Regional Tourism Conference. The delegates report was written conjointly by Councillor Luke and no, Councillor Luke, you'd like to move the motion. Thank you, Councillor Luke. Do I have a seconder to the motion? Thank you, Councillor McGrath. Councillor Luke, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It was a very interesting tourism conference to attend, as my fellow councillors will read in the report. The tourism team leader did in fact write that report with a slight bit of contribution from myself. Even though at the moment we may not have a large agritourism sector here in Gunnedah. I think that there is always the possibility that that will actually be something that will develop in the future. And having that knowledge as to where that sector can lead and the opportunities is very important. So it was an interesting conference to attend, and I commend the report to my fellow councillors.
Thank you, councillor Luke. I'll now call for elected member who may like to ask a question or speak against the motion. Councillor McGrath is the second to the motion. Do you wish to speak to it?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
There are no further questions or debate, councillors. I put the motion. All in favour? Against? Unanimously supported. Moving right along, which is item 16, notice of motion or questions on notice, and there are none questions on notice or notice of motions for November. So, councillors, we now come to a closed meeting, and I may ask, are there any reasons why anyone believes the agenda items should not be determined in closed council? No? Be the case then, I'd like to request an elected member. Thank you, councillor Hook, and seconded by councillor Moses. And that is that they've moved and seconded a motion that we go into closed meeting to discuss reports of confidential nature. So now I'll put that motion. All in favour? Against? Unanimously supported. There's a theme. So, councillors, our November ordinary meeting will now be suspending our broadcast, as the elected members will be discussing items of a confidential nature. And if I could, Ms. Nyes, if I could please ask that you put on the record that all those who should not be in the gallery have removed themselves from the gallery. For those joining us virtually, I hope you heard that. I'm about to read out the resolutions of closed council, and then I'll close the meeting. So I have confirmation that we are not live streaming, but we're taping, correct? Right. So let me begin with item 17.1. If we could have that on the screen, please. Ms. McLean. I'll now read out the resolutions of closed council, starting with item 17.1, tender T2223-06, shared pathway connection program, stormwater program. And the resolution of council is that Central Industries Proprietary Limited be awarded contract T2223-06 as a single source supplier to Gunnedah Shire Council for the design and construction of the Riverine Precinct Stormwater Bridge to the value of $102,768, subject to funding deed variation approval by the Public Space Legacy Program. Moving on to the next item, 17.2, we have a resolution that reads in two-part from council that Darracon be awarded contract T2122-18 as a single source supplier to Gunnedah Shire Council for the shared pathway connection Riverine Stormwater Precinct to the value of $813,118.65, subject to funding deed variation approval by the Public Space Legacy Program. And two, the council approved to use the schedule of rates submitted by Darracon in tender T2122-18 to continue construction of the shared pathway connected program into the urban stormwater precinct as far as budget will allow post Riverine stormwater precinct construction. Moving on to item 17.3. We have a resolution that reads that council one, award the contract of tender T2122-19 for the default traffic option 2 described in the tender document to Airport Consulting Group and increase the total project budget by $4,585,731, including contingency, subject to the required additional funding being made available. A, the additional funding being made available by using internally restricted reserve being drawn from the contingency internal restricted asset and the financial assistance grant internal restricted asset. And B, further, council seeks state and Commonwealth grant funding through our state and federal members, and C, council actively explore all other available funding revenues. And then the next item was 17.4, and we have a resolution of council that reads in 3 parts that in relation to the report tender T242223 Nemoy Regional Procurement, Supply and Delivery of Bitumen Emulsion Bulk, Gunnedah Council. 1, approve the following tender submission be awarded this contract T24223 Nemoy A Bitupave Limited, trading as Boral Asphalt New South Wales ACT. And 2, commence the contract on 1 January 2023 for a period of 24 months with the provision for a 12-month extension based on satisfactory supplier performance, which may extend the contract up to the 31st of December 2026. And 3, authorise the seal of the council to be affixed to the contract. Next item, 17.6. 17.5. And we have a resolution of council that reads, the council resolve the authority to sell 2 12-metre articulated motor graders in line with the existing internal policy framework. This sale will form part of council's endorsed asset renewal strategy as new plant and equipment comes online. And the last item in closed council was item 18.1, and it reads that council 1, note the general manager's performance evaluation and as recommended by the Performance Review Committee, and accordingly 2, approve the determined increase to total remuneration package in the amount of 3.5% effective from the 4th of November 2022. That was the last item of closed council. It gives me great pleasure to officially close the meeting for November, the ordinary meeting, the second last meeting for 2022 at 7:32. Thanks for your attendance.